Hello everyone and welcome to my BNB CBS Gossip 24 channel. Electra's new pregnancy begins as a fragile ember of hope glowing in the aftermath of past losses, betrayals and emotional exhaustion. Yet from the very first moment the news is revealed, an undercurrent of dread coils beneath the surface, quietly foreshadowing that this joy will not come without an unbearable cost, because this is not merely the story of a woman expecting a child, but the unraveling of secrets buried so deeply that even Electra herself has tried to forget them, and as her body begins to change, so too does the atmosphere around her, thick with unanswered questions, hushed conversations, and glances that linger just a second too long, as if those closest to her already sense that something is profoundly wrong. The pregnancy initially seems miraculous, almost defiant in its timing, arriving when Electra has finally begun to rebuild her life. And for a brief moment she allows herself to believe that this child is a reward for her suffering, a second chance to reclaim innocence and love. Yet the first medical appointment introduces a faint crack in that illusion, a subtle irregularity on a scan that the doctor dismisses with professional calm but which sends a tremor through Electra's intuition, an instinct sharpened by years of emotional survival. And as weeks pass, the symptoms intensify in ways that defy normal explanation. Pain blooming where there should be comfort, exhaustion bordering on collapse, and nightmares so vivid they bleed into her waking hours, dreams in which the baby cries from somewhere impossibly distant, unreachable, as though trapped behind glass or shadow. When the doctors finally stop reassuring her and begin running tests in silence, the tone shifts irrevocably, transforming anticipation into fear, because the results reveal a terrifying complication that cannot be easily named or treated. A rare and dangerous condition that threatens not only the life of the unborn child but Electra's own, blurring the boundary between miracle and catastrophe, and the medical language, clinical, detached, precise, fails to capture the emotional devastation of what they discover. That this pregnancy is fundamentally unstable, behaving unlike any they have seen before, growing too fast in some ways, not enough in others, as if caught between worlds, forcing the doctors to confront ethical dilemmas and impossible choices that place Electra at the center of a nightmare where every option carries irreversible consequences. As fear spreads through her family, old wounds reopen because this pregnancy does not exist in isolation. It is tangled with Electra's past, including a trauma she never fully confronted, a loss she buried so deeply it shaped her without her consent. And now the complication seems to echo that history, raising unsettling questions about whether this condition is purely biological or the manifestation of something long suppressed, a physical reckoning with emotional truth. And as specialists are brought in, each more alarmed than the last, Electra begins to realize that information is being withheld from her, that whispers follow her down hospital corridors, and that the doctors know more than they are willing to say, not out of cruelty, but because the truth itself is almost unbearable. That continuing the pregnancy may cause catastrophic damage, that intervention may save her but doom the child, and that waiting, hoping for improvement, could result in losing both, turning every passing day into a ticking clock. Joy curdles into panic as Electra's sense of bodily autonomy erodes, replaced by charts, scans, and risk percentages. Yet even as fear consumes her, she feels an unbreakable bond with the life inside her, a connection that deepens precisely because of the danger, making the choice she may be forced to make feel like an act of betrayal no matter the outcome. And this internal conflict fractures her relationships, exposing fault lines of blame, guilt, and desperation as loved ones argue over what she should do, each projecting their own fears onto her body, her future, her survival. Meanwhile, the pregnancy itself becomes a source of secrecy as Electra hides the severity of her condition from the outside world, unable to bear the pity or judgment that would follow. And in this isolation her mind spirals, questioning whether this pregnancy is a gift or a punishment, whether her body is trying to create life or warning her to let go, and whether the darkness surrounding this child is an omen of something far worse yet to come. The shocking discovery made by the doctors, that the complication may be linked to a genetic anomaly triggered by extreme stress, or possibly a rare condition that causes the mother's body to perceive the fetus as a threat, reframes everything Electra thought she knew about herself, forcing her to confront the brutal truth that love alone cannot protect her or her child, and that survival may require a kind of strength she has never had to summon before, one that involves choosing between two futures, neither of which resembles the life she imagined. As the pregnancy progresses, each appointment becomes an ordeal, each heartbeat heard on a monitor both a relief and a reminder of the stakes. And the fear intensifies when it becomes clear that the condition is worsening, not stabilizing, pushing Electra toward an inevitable crossroads where delay is no longer possible and the narrative tightens around her psychological descent, capturing the suffocating weight of carrying not just a child but the responsibility for a decision that will haunt her forever. The script transforms pregnancy, a symbol so often associated with hope, into a battleground where science, morality, love, and fear collide, using Electra's experience to explore the terror of losing control over one's own body and destiny, and the haunting question of how much suffering a person can endure in the name of love. And the serious problem behind Electra's pregnancy is not only the medical complication itself, terrifying and rare though it is, but the way it forces every character to confront their deepest truths, revealing hidden agendas, unresolved grief, and the limits of human resilience. As Electra stands at the center of the storm, her joy irrevocably transformed into panic, her hope sharpened by despair, and her pregnancy no longer just a personal journey but a dark, emotionally charged reckoning that changes everything, leaving no one untouched and ensuring that whatever choice is made, innocence will be lost, and the echoes of this pregnancy, its fear, its secrets, its unbearable weight, will linger long after the final decision is reached. As Electra moves closer to the point of no return, the world around her begins to contract, shrinking into a relentless cycle of hospital rooms, muted lighting, antiseptic air, and the constant hum of machines that seem to monitor not just her body but her fate. And with every passing day the pregnancy asserts itself as something both fiercely alive and dangerously hostile, a paradox that leaves Electra emotionally suspended between devotion and terror, because the child inside her responds to her touch, to her voice, to moments of calm, yet those same moments are followed by sudden waves of pain or alarming test results that remind her how fragile the situation truly is. The doctors, now stripped of optimism, speak in careful half-sentences, their eyes betraying the gravity of what they see on the screens. And when Electra overhears two specialists arguing behind a closed door, one insisting that the pregnancy cannot safely continue, the other suggesting a risky experimental approach, she realizes that her body has become a battlefield for theories and probabilities, her life reduced to percentages that shift daily, and this realization fractures something inside her, igniting a quiet fury at how little agency she seems to have over her own existence, even as she understands that everyone involved is desperately trying to save her. At night, alone with her thoughts, Electra revisits memories she has avoided for years, moments of loss, abandonment, and guilt that now feel eerily connected to the present, as if her body is replaying unresolved trauma in biological form. And she begins to question whether the pregnancy's dark turn is forcing her to confront truths she buried long ago, about her fear of motherhood, her belief that she is somehow cursed, and the lingering sense that happiness has always come to her with a price she never fully anticipates. The secrecy surrounding her condition grows heavier as well, because while the public narrative remains one of cautious joy, behind closed doors Electra is preparing for the possibility of death, drafting letters she may never send, recording messages she may never deliver, and making peace with the idea that her story could end not with a birth, but with an unbearable absence, and this dual existence, smiling reassurance on the outside, raw terror within, isolates her more deeply than any physical confinement ever could. Relationships strain under the weight of unspoken blame as loved ones grapple with their own helplessness, some urging her to prioritize her life above all else, others clinging to the idea that sacrifice is noble, and Electra finds herself resenting them all, not because they are wrong, but because none of them can truly understand what it feels like to carry both hope and harm in the same breath, to love something that may destroy you. When the doctors finally present her with a definitive diagnosis, a rare, aggressive condition that causes the placenta to invade too deeply, entangling itself with vital organs and triggering immune responses that threaten systemic failure, the room falls silent, because the words confirm what Electra has long sensed, that this pregnancy is not simply complicated, but catastrophic if left unchecked, and that survival for both mother and child is no longer a likely outcome but an improbable miracle. The proposed intervention, a dangerous procedure that could stabilize the condition but carries an enormous risk of hemorrhage and fetal loss, becomes the only alternative to termination, and the decision is placed squarely in Electra's hands, forcing her to confront the unbearable truth that love does not absolve responsibility, and that choosing life, for herself or for her child, means choosing loss as well. In the days leading up to the decision, Electra's internal world becomes a storm of imagined futures, each one vivid and devastating, as she envisions holding her child for the first time only to lose them moments later, or surviving the procedure only to wake to silence where a heartbeat once was, or refusing intervention and slowly deteriorating until she becomes another tragic case study whispered about in hospital corridors. And these visions erode the boundaries between fear and reality, leaving her emotionally exhausted yet painfully lucid. Amid this turmoil, a quiet shift occurs within Electra, not toward certainty, but toward clarity, as she begins to understand that whatever choice she makes will define her not by the outcome, but by the courage to confront it honestly. And this realization does not bring peace, but it does bring resolve, a fragile but unyielding sense that she will not allow fear alone to decide her fate. When she finally consents to the procedure, the moment is not marked by drama but by a profound stillness, as if the world itself pauses in acknowledgement of the gravity of her choice. And as she is wheeled into surgery, she speaks softly to the life inside her. Not with promises she cannot keep, but with gratitude, apology, and love, offering what may be her final act of motherhood in the form of truth rather than hope. The operation unfolds in a blur of controlled chaos, alarms sounding, hands moving swiftly, decisions made in seconds. And when Electra wakes, suspended between consciousness and darkness, the first thing she feels is absence. Not pain, not relief, but a hollow quiet that tells her something irrevocable has occurred. And when the doctor finally confirms that the child did not survive, but that Electra's life has been saved, the words land with a muted finality that feels both merciful and cruel, because survival itself becomes complicated by grief, and Electra is left to navigate a future she never wanted but must now inhabit. Recovery is slow and uneven, marked not just by physical healing but by emotional reckoning, as Electra grapples with guilt that has no clear target, sorrow that has no end point, and anger that flares unexpectedly at her body, at fate, at the narrative that promised joy and delivered devastation. And yet within this grief, something resilient begins to form, a quiet acknowledgement that she endured what should have destroyed her, and that endurance itself is a form of meaning. The world, eager to move on, struggles to accommodate her loss, offering platitudes that feel hollow, but Electra learns to exist without explanation, to honor her experience without reducing it to tragedy or triumph. And as time passes, the fear that once consumed her slowly transforms into something else. Not acceptance but understanding, a recognition that the darkness of her pregnancy revealed not her weakness, but her capacity to face impossible truths without surrendering to them. The story of Electra's pregnancy does not conclude with closure or redemption but with transformation, because the serious problem that once threatened to end her life ultimately reshapes it, stripping away illusions and forcing her to redefine hope not as the promise of happy endings, but as the strength to survive when they are denied, ensuring that while the pregnancy ended in loss, its impact endures, etched into Electra's identity as a testament to love that existed even in fear, and courage that persisted even when joy turned irrevocably to panic. In the months that follow Electra's physical recovery, time behaves strangely, stretching and folding in on itself so that days blur together while certain moments remain painfully sharp. And although her body slowly reclaims a sense of normalcy, her inner world exists in a state of permanent alteration, as if the pregnancy carved out a chamber inside her where grief, memory, and resilience now coexist. And she discovers that survival is not a single event but a daily negotiation with absence. Because everywhere she goes she encounters echoes of the life that almost was. In the quiet of early mornings when she wakes instinctively expecting movement, in the reflexive way her hands rest on her abdomen, in the way silence now carries weight rather than peace. The hospital releases her back into a world that feels indifferent and unprepared for the complexity of her experience. And while friends and family hover at first, unsure how to comfort her, their concern gradually fades into awkward distance, leaving Electra alone with questions no one else seems willing to ask, including the most persistent one of all. Who is she now, stripped of the future she had been forced to imagine so vividly? And how does one move forward when the defining event of one's life has no visible marker, no child to mourn publicly, no ritual sufficient to contain the magnitude of loss. She begins therapy at the urging of her doctors, not because she believes it will heal her but because the weight of her thoughts has become unbearable. And in those quiet rooms she learns to speak aloud the fears she once believed were too dark to voice, admitting that part of her feels relief alongside grief, relief that her body survived, relief that the pain has an end point. And this admission brings with it a new layer of guilt that threatens to suffocate her, until she slowly understands that conflicting emotions do not negate love, but rather reveal the depth of what she endured. As weeks turn into months, Electra becomes acutely aware of how society frames stories like hers, preferring neat narratives of either tragedy or triumph. And she resents how often people search her face for signs of strength, as if endurance must always present itself as composure, when in reality her resilience manifests in quieter, messier ways, in the simple act of getting out of bed, in allowing herself to cry without apology, in resisting the urge to rewrite the past with imaginary choices that promise a different outcome. She revisits the secrecy that once surrounded her pregnancy and realizes how deeply it shaped her isolation, understanding now that silence protected her when she needed control, but also imprisoned her when she needed connection. And this insight slowly encourages her to open up, selectively and cautiously, sharing fragments of her story with those who prove capable of holding it without judgment or pity. And in doing so she begins to reclaim authorship over her narrative, refusing to let it be reduced to medical terminology or whispered speculation. Her relationship with her own body remains complicated, marked by betrayal and gratitude in equal measure, because the same body that endangered her life also endured surgery, pain, and loss to preserve it, and learning to trust it again becomes one of her greatest challenges, as each ache or irregularity triggers fear that something else is wrong, that disaster is cyclical and inevitable. And yet through gentle persistence she begins to see her body not as an enemy, but as a witness to her survival, scarred but steadfast, carrying evidence not just of loss but of strength. Occasionally, Electra allows herself to imagine alternative futures, not as a form of self-torture, but as a way of honoring the significance of what she lost, acknowledging that the child mattered, that the pregnancy mattered, even if its outcome defied expectation, and she learns that remembrance does not require permanence, that love can exist without continuation, and this realization becomes a quiet anchor in her healing process. Unexpected moments of connection emerge as well, particularly when she meets others who have experienced similar losses, and in their shared understanding she finds relief from the exhausting effort of explanation, discovering that grief spoken aloud loses some of its power to isolate, and that collective vulnerability can be a form of resistance against the silence that once consumed her. Yet even as she heals, Electra remains haunted by the knowledge that her pregnancy was not an anomaly but a warning, that future attempts at motherhood may carry the same risks, and this uncertainty forces her to confront questions she once postponed indefinitely, about whether she wants to try again, whether she can endure the fear, and whether redefining fulfillment outside of motherhood is an act of surrender or self-preservation. And these questions do not yield easy answers, instead lingering in the background of her life like unresolved chords. Gradually, Electra begins to reinvest in parts of herself that existed before the pregnancy, returning to passions she abandoned, reconnecting with ambitions that once seemed trivial compared to the enormity of creating life. And she is surprised to find that these pursuits do not diminish the significance of her loss, but rather expand her sense of identity beyond it, reminding her that she is more than the sum of her suffering, even as that suffering remains integral to who she has become. Anniversaries arrive unexpectedly, dates tied to appointments, diagnoses, and decisions that still vibrate with emotional intensity. And on those days Electra allows herself to grieve fully, honoring the memory of a pregnancy that changed her forever, not by romanticizing it, but by acknowledging its truth in all its terror and tenderness. And through this ritual of remembrance she gradually loosens the grip of fear that once defined her days. The medical aftermath continues as well, with follow-up appointments that confirm both the success of the intervention and the permanence of its consequences. And while the clinical language of prognosis and risk no longer terrifies her as it once did, it serves as a constant reminder that her body carries a history that cannot be erased, only integrated. And this integration becomes the central task of her recovery, weaving loss into life without allowing it to eclipse everything else. Over time, Electra notices a subtle shift in how she perceives hope, recognizing that it no longer manifests as expectation, but as openness, a willingness to engage with the present without demanding guarantees. And this reframing allows her to experience joy in fleeting, imperfect forms, moments of laughter, connection, and peace that do not promise permanence but offer sincerity, and she learns to accept them without fear of tempting fate. The story of her pregnancy, once shrouded in secrecy and dread, evolves into a private source of wisdom, shaping how she approaches vulnerability, choice, and compassion. And although she does not speak of it often, its lessons inform her interactions, deepening her empathy for others' unseen battles and strengthening her resolve to live authentically, even when authenticity requires confronting pain. In time, Electra reaches a point where the memory of fear no longer dominates her narrative, where the panic that once consumed her has softened into vigilance rather than paralysis, and she understands that healing does not mean forgetting, but learning to carry the weight of experience without being crushed by it. And this understanding marks a quiet but profound turning point, because it signifies her transition from survival to living. The serious problem that once defined her pregnancy ultimately becomes a catalyst for transformation, reshaping her relationship with herself, her body, and her future. And while the loss remains irreparable, it is no longer the sole lens through which she views her life, allowing her to move forward not with certainty, but with courage, honoring what was lost while embracing what remains. And in this balance, Electra finds a form of peace that does not erase the darkness of her past, but exists alongside it, resilient, honest, and deeply human.